The Affective Labour project that I'm doing with David Farrugia and Julia Coffey is about young people's labour in the service industry and particularly in bars. We've done a pilot study already, and what we're interested in is, in youth studies there's been a long and very important history of studying school to work transitions, and what that means is studying the ways that people the gap between people finishing school and when they get a full-time job. Increasingly that includes tertiary education, but it also means a bunch of other stuff. Within that research, as there should be, there's been a strong focus on things like exploitation, on the fact that young people earn less wages, that there's higher unemployment and all that kind of thing. All that stuff's really important. But what's also happened in recent times is that there's actually new forms of labour, new forms of value that are attached to young people themselves that are very valuable in terms of selling stuff. Young people are kind of at a much higher proportion in the service industry, working in bars, at cafes and that kind of thing. Now that's because of the wages in many ways, and it's because of much of the time those jobs are can be seen as temporary jobs on the way to something else. But there's more to it than that, is that the venues themselves want young people in their venues to sell stuff. Bars want young, attractive people in there to sell, cocktails and beers. Cafes want the right-looking people to fit the vibe of their cafe. So young people themselves are kind of intrinsic to creating the vibe, which in and of itself is part of the product of consuming beer or coffee or food. So the Affective Labour project has been looking at that. It looks at the ways that what's called effective labour, where it's not just people coming to work and doing stuff, it's actually the very presence of the person. Their whole subjectivity becomes part of the experience of working and consuming in that space, and how that's used and abused in the service industries. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on. Some of it's really good. We have people, particularly young people that work in places that they would go to themselves and would consume at, often get a lot of pleasure about working in those spaces. There tends to be a much more emotional labour going on when you're working in a place that you don't really like, or you don't really like the people that consume there. So we have some really interesting stories around, class relations where, there's kind of young, kind of lefty alternate people working in a kind of hipsterish bar where kind of business people come in and they have, there's 5 blokes, one dude's got a credit card and they're all very arrogant and, they don't really talk to the staff very nicely. So we have really interesting data about how that relationship plays out. But what we also know is that there's a whole bunch of sexual harassment and gender stuff that goes on that's completely normalised. And this is just part of it's just accepted. But what we're finding is that the bar staff have really interesting ways of dealing with this stuff that in some ways is taken for granted, and it certainly shouldn't be. But particularly young women find all kinds of ways to kind of deal with the presence of often sexually aggressive men. And the experience of that within the bars as well is very dependent on the support of management and the other people around them to create some kind of community to help them do that and to help them, feel like they're not just kind of part of the furniture in the place. So this research, in a way, is trying to expand our understanding of young people at work. It's not just about what they do per se, it's about their very presence, about the things that young people represent, and the way that brings value in and of itself into the service industry. And it's important in terms of wider economics. Places like Melbourne have base their kind of PR about how this is a great place to come on their nightlife and on the hip kind of bars, whether it's in the outer or whether it's in the north. And this very much relies on the kind of effective labour of the people and the young people in those spaces. So this project is a way of kind of getting an understanding of how that works, that moves beyond just the basic exploitation where it's definitely happening and they're not being paid award wages, they can't get secure work sometimes and not in control of your own time. But there's more than that going on as well, and that's the kind of stuff that we want to uncover.